centre. Mothers, children, old and young, Ibrahim's intended victims. His target, the Mall Galleries in the centre of Bristol. The would-be bomber had everything he needed to carry out a suicide attack and was ready to go.
How close he was, I can't say. It could have been done in a matter of hours. He could have done it in days or weeks. But certainly the decision of the court is that that was his intention.
If Ibrahim had detonated his bomb in the shopping centre, it's thought the blast would have had the force of up to 6 hand grenades. Those closest to him would have been killed instantly, possibly hundreds more injured. So how do we know Ibrahim was planning an attack on the Mall Galleries? Well, police recovered footage of him wrecking the shopping centre just days before his arrest. And notes were found on his mobile phone detailing entrances, the location of escalators and bins, and timings on how long it would take to escape the building. To demonstrate the power of the blast, we've asked an explosives engineer to construct a bomb similar to the one Ibrahim planned to make.
We'll strap the bomb to this mannequin, and we have cameras all around to give you an idea of what it would have looked like had Ibrahim detonated his device in the shopping centre.
If you spray that lot into a crowd, it depends on the density of the crowd. I wouldn't be at all surprised if several people were killed and a dozen or two injured. Now, if it's a crowded place, you can expect to have a panic, and God only knows how many people can then be killed by other people walking over them.
Charging. Firing. 4, 3, 2, 1.
Imagine these were real people, or children. The explosion is catastrophic. The bomb has ripped apart the bomber. But what about those standing close to him?
What sort of injuries would these ladies have received?
You can see that they're absolutely peppered with fragments. That would have gone through the heart, no doubt about that. One through the left kidney, various wounds to the gut would have been very probably, any one of those could have been lethal. She's dead.
So how does a 19-year-old from Westbury-on-Trim learn how to make such a devastating bomb? All the information he needed is on the internet, including a step-by-step guide on how to make a suicide bomb. For security reasons, we've edited these pictures. Once Ibrahim had learnt how to make his bomb, he had to source his materials. After reviewing more than 160,000 hours, equivalent to 18.5 years of CCTV images, police were able to trace his movements in the days leading up to his arrest. To create his explosive, Ibrahim needed to mix hydrogen peroxide with other household chemicals. On the 9th of April, he visits Oswald Bailey's in the Horse Fair and purchases the main ingredient for his bomb. Later that day, he visits Maplin's in Gloucester Road and buys component parts for the detonator. 3 days later, he asks a boy to buy hydrogen peroxide for him at Boots in Broadmead. He then catches a bus to the Mall at Cripps Causeway, changes his appearance en route from Muslim to Western, and buys more bottles of hydrogen peroxide at Boots. The night before his arrest, he takes hundreds of airgun pellets from his father's house at Frenchay. In less than a week, he gathers everything he needs to carry out a suicide bombing, all for less than £50.
He had all the things he needed to put together a viable device with a reasonable amount of high explosives that would have, if ignited in a busy shopping area, would have certainly have caused serious injury to quite a few people, if not killed them.
So would Ibrahim really have detonated his bomb here, ending his life and killing and maiming innocent shoppers? We'll never know for sure, as the tip-off to police ensured he didn't get the chance. But what if he had?
Rebecca Broxton in Bristol for the West Country Tonight. Manchester, 1996. The city centre is destroyed by the biggest bomb ever planted by the IRA. The devastation is total. Only a warning prevents mass casualties.
That was more than a decade ago. Terrorists operating today don't give warnings. They want to commit mass murder. So how do you try to prevent them?
It's very difficult once when you're talking about an individual who is intent on carrying out a bombing. What you can do is you can prevent it against large vehicles entering these public spaces, and you can mitigate against the effects of a bomb blast.
Imagine a lorry packed with explosives. The driver, a terrorist. The target, a 10-storey office building. Without the terrorist-proof bollard, hundreds could have lost their lives. It's just one example of how new technology and design can help in the fight against terror. Those who design our public areas are now working with counter-terrorist teams, assessing the threat and incorporating appropriate counter-terrorism measures.
We'll be making sure that buildings can withstand blast. We'll be making sure that internal partitioning in buildings is such that it helps if ever there's a blast goes off.
Why are we going this way? Stop pushing me! In a bomb blast, 8 out of 10 deaths and injuries are caused by flying glass. Look at what happens to normal glass during an explosion. Fragments shoot out. Yet laminated, bomb-proof glass withstands the pressure. It's design elements like this that planners and architects need to consider.
The threat from terrorism is real and immediate.
Avon and Somerset's counter-terrorism team holds a workshop for students. It's the first of its kind in the country.
Use art features as more shielding.
The students here at the University of the West of England are the urban designers and planners of the future. So, how would they try to prevent a terrorist attack, or indeed mitigate the effects of one?
So we need to be thinking about creating some kind of barriers in and out of the car park area.
It's been very thought-provoking, I think. It's something I've never thought about before from a planning perspective. It's obviously something that all authorities are going to have to look at in the future.
We know that right now our public places are under surveillance from groups of individuals who have learnt to recognise signs of vulnerability, whose eyes are trained to look at a space and assess how much damage can be caused.
It's impossible to eliminate the threat completely, but the new challenge for designers and planners is to reduce it.
But we have to weigh up that change against commercial pressures and against commercial interests and against the interests of the people who use the towns and cities, because we want to keep them open. We don't want to build walls all around them. We don't want them to look too defensive and off-putting. And, designing these things so that we get that compromise and that mix is the most important change in our approach.
Getting the balance right will be the key to saving lives. Another Manchester, this time without a warning, simply doesn't bear thinking about. They're the invisible crack shots of the British Army, an elite band of highly trained riflemen. And they're coming into their own fighting the elusive Taliban in Afghanistan.
5, 4, 3...
Shooting's only one part of it. There's a whole different side of sniping as well, which is information gathering really. It's what we're good at, be able to get in, get out without being seen.
Snipers are being used daily in Iraq and Afghanistan. Those chosen for the job are some of the best the infantry has to offer. Now they're being given the equipment to match their skills.
The British Army says this is the best sniper rifle in the world. It has a range of over 1,000 metres. The telescopic sight increases the size of a target by 25 times. It also has night vision capabilities. In comparison to older weapons, well, there's less recoil, and the suppressor on the end means it's not so easily detected by enemies. All that, and it has a higher calibre bullet as well.
This is a sniper's eye view of a target 1,000 metres away, a distance equivalent of 10 football pitches placed end to end. You wouldn't want to be on the receiving end of this.
This piece of equipment coming to service will make snipers safer, and it will make it easier for us to protect our soldiers and keep the enemy at distance.
You're not getting pinpointed straight away with a sound, so it just makes your survivability that much greater. Obviously, if we can engage them from far away, the further the better, really. I mean, you don't want to be getting up close and personal when you can do it from a long distance.
Any collateral damage upon the civilian population is, it's all over the media as soon as it happens. So this gives the commander an option whereby it minimises collateral damage.
Indeed, these men could be over a kilometre away from their enemy and through their sights still be able to see the whites of their target's eyes.
At the end of the day, you've identified them and they're legitimate targets, so you try not to personalise the target when you take the shot.
Next month, these men will be deployed to Afghanistan. They'll spend days in the desert, watching, waiting, listening. And the Taliban won't know they're there. Rebecca Broxton on Salisbury Plain for the West Tonight.
If it wasn't for this, water, Stroud wouldn't exist, and neither would Nailsworth. Both towns grew out of the textile industry, an industry which dates back in the Stroud Valleys to the Middle Ages.
Back then, sheep roaming the Cotswolds ensured a plentiful supply of wool for what was a cottage industry. But there was good money to be made from cloth, and during the 16th and 17th centuries, mills harnessing the power of local waterways were built, and the Stroud Valley's textile industry made a name for itself worldwide.
There's something like 170 mills in the valleys, and when we're able to supply by the 1800s, not only the British Army fighting endless wars and the Navy as well, but also to begin a major expansion of exports out to China with the East India Company.
At the time, around 6,000 local people were employed in the industry. But then came the Industrial Revolution. Jobs were lost as machines took over.
Power looms in the Stroud Valleys resulted in the Stroud Valleys equivalent of the Luddite riots. We had the Stroud Valleys riots where machines were smashed. In the end, when all that settled down, the positives is if we can make more cloth, we were able to sell more cloth.
The cloth was shrunk and thickened in fulling stocks or milling machines. before being fluffed up in the teasel raising gig. And finally, shorn for a smooth finish. The Stroud Valley mills flourished until the introduction of steam power.
Once steam is here, we don't need to be in the Stroud Valleys where there are narrow valleys, fast running water, helping with the water power. Once you've got steam, you might as well be in the coalfields or near the coalfields.
By the time Ken Stadden started working at the age of 14, there were just a handful of working mills left in the Stroud Valleys.
What was it like? What were the sights?
Frightened me to death, first of all. But you learned very quickly that you had to be very, very careful where you put your hand.
Machines by this time were huge. The carding machines that turned washed wool into thread. The mules which spun the thread into yarn. And the high-powered looms.
Well, this is a scrapbook of all the different cloths produced here at Stanley Mill between 1965 and 1966. There are literally hundreds of different samples, including one here for Burberry.
But cheaper imports were already beginning to take a hold of the market. Unable to compete, Stanley Mill closed in 1989.
The truth is that we simply cannot run an industry in buildings like Stanley Mill anymore. They were built for a time when machinery was just being introduced into the county, so they really are, in a way, dinosaurs.
Today, around half of the Stroud Valley mills still stand. Some are derelict. Others converted to offices, hotels or flats. Just 2 are still working mills. WSP Textiles is the only local textile firm to survive. Exporting worldwide, it produces billiard cloth to World Championship standard, together with the material used to cover tennis balls.
We have skills that have been here for a long time. We still have people who have worked for us for up to 50 years, so we don't want to lose those skills. We use modern technology on the equipment, but essentially the processes work in exactly the same way as they did 50, 60, 100 years ago.
The firm's 150 employees ensure that a centuries-old manufacturing tradition lives on. Rebecca Broxton in the Stroud Valleys for the West Country Tonight.
So here's the race leader. Appalling conditions here as she comes into the right-hand bend. It's Broxton in the lead. Coming up to the checkered flag now. Back to the onboard camera. Broxton wins for Great Britain.
Lewis Hamilton, eat your heart out.
Yeah, right. In my dreams. The last time I was at Castle Combe, they told me anyone can drive a racing car. Really, I said? Come and have a go, they said. So that's how I find myself at the circuit's racing school, with 20 other novice drivers about to follow in the tyre tracks of the motor racing greats. The likes of Ayrton Senna, David Coulthard, Nigel Mansell and Stirling Moss. Though he seemed to have a rather unusual way of negotiating the track. Briefing over, time for some instruction in a saloon car.
Staying in third gear and on the brakes again. Can you see how I'm aiming for that red cone?
Yep.
Smooth turning. Just get nice and close to the rumble strips, but not on them.
Then it was my turn.
So, braking now, third gear. And off the brakes, smooth turning, on the power. That's it, get the lock off as soon as you can. Unwind the lock. Brilliant.
Well, it's all very well charging around a circuit in a normal saloon car, but what about the real thing?
There's a lot of standing water there. Oh! The thing about these single seaters is you're so low to the ground that you feel every bump. The thing is, I'm constantly thinking as I'm driving. Everything that Ben told me about. Down to third, into the corner, that was much better. Hit the 8, whoa! We had a bit of a spin there, but I managed to hold on to it. Brake into the corner. Whoa! Whoa! Oops. Not very clever. Well, that was absolutely amazing, but I have to say, you're constantly thinking all the time going around the track about when to brake, when to turn, when to accelerate, and it's incredibly difficult to get it right. So Ben, how do you think I did?
I think you've done very well. I think it's been a very difficult day because of the weather conditions. It's been wet and dry and mega wet, but I think you've done very well. Just don't give up your day job.
So I'm not going to give Lewis Hamilton a run for his money then?
I think you might need a few 100,000 more laps to perhaps give him a run for his money, but you can but try.
Rebecca Broxton at Castle Coombs Racing School for the West Tonight. He only sat on a horse 2 years ago. Now Neil Payne is one of the top 20 horse archers in Europe.
I just find it absolutely exhilarating. I've never had a buzz or an experience like it. You just feel completely alive when you're on the horse riding and shooting and hitting the target especially.
The origins of horseback archery go back centuries.
Originally it was an art of war that came from the steppe regions, for example the Mongols, Ottoman Turks, Scythians, etc., ancient civilizations.
But the discipline's only taken off as a sport in the last few years.
Well, you do have to be a good rider, an experienced rider, because obviously you're dealing with an animal and they can be unpredictable, and you do have to be a good archer. So it's not like jumping on a bike that you can, pick up in 10-15 minutes. It does take a lot of time, a lot of practice. Essentially it comes down to two things. One is accuracy, hitting the target. It's the same with field archery, hitting the bullseye is the highest score, and then also speed. So the faster you're riding, the more points you'll accumulate as well.
Now I ride. I've never ridden with no reins firing a bow and arrow. Can I do it?
Anyone can do it that can ride, definitely.
Let's have a go then.
Let's do it. Right hand with the rein.
Yeah.
Get it ready, hold the right hand with the reins, then kick her and then let go of the reins. And then
I'm out.
A quick archery lesson and I'm ready to go.
Oh yes! Okay, so just how difficult can this really be? Yes!
Hey, they'll make a horse archer out of me yet. Rebecca Broxton in South Petherton for the West Tonight. This is some of the most amazing flying you will ever see. And these are some of the best pilots in the world. It's heart-stopping stuff. There's no room for error.
It is extremely exciting. It's also very, very challenging. And as you go through your aviation career, you pass little hurdles and obstacles and you develop a level of experience which then makes you begin to look for more challenges.
And this is the ultimate?
Well, I'll tell you after a race.
These races have proved incredibly popular. 750,000 people applied to watch this Sunday's event, but only 40,000 were lucky enough to get tickets. To give you an idea of what it's like to be in one of these aircraft, I rather stupidly volunteered to go up in one. I must be mad.
We're just a few seconds from takeoff, and I have to say I am absolutely terrified. But I am assured I'm in very good hands with my pilot Nigel Lamb. So fingers crossed I managed to keep my lunch down.
Wow, this is incredible! Woohoo!
You okay?
That's great!
Here comes the roll. You ready?
That was good!
You alright?
Fantastic!
Quite precise, isn't it?
It's not often I'm at a loss for words.
You alright?
Fine!
A little barrel roll. You're a good passenger, Becky.
Thank you very much!
That was absolutely amazing. The speed of the manoeuvres and the G-force was incredible. I think my stomach has just about caught up with me, but that has to be the most fun you can have with your clothes on. Rebecca Broxton for ITV West News, having the time of her life in the skies above Wiltshire. "48 hours on from the terrible events of Monday afternoon, the beach at Sagres is quiet. The talk in bars and cafes is of nothing else. The deaths of Bob and Debbie Fry and Jean Dinsmore are headline news in Portugal, and locals are struggling to come to terms with what's happened.
Beach tunnel is sometimes we have some big waves. It's too much danger for swimming. It's necessary, the people is necessary more attention.
I just hope people just pay a little more attention for their own safety, and maybe things like this won't happen so much.
There are suggestions that the Portuguese authorities are considering taking action against the adults who survived. They've taken statements from witnesses who say the families involved were told earlier in the afternoon about the dangerous currents and advised to take their children out of the water. They apparently failed to heed the warnings, with tragic consequences.
I was really surprised, even I'm shaking because of this situation. I could not believe it. I'm sorry, they wasn't very clever to go again. Once if you are in danger, you feel the panic and you go again to the same place. And the tide was going out, was big waves, was real danger what they did.
I have 3 grandchildren and 2 daughters, and I would never let my grandchildren in this water because I think it's too dangerous.
Questions too are still being asked as to why the warning signs on the beach are so inadequate. But away from the recriminations, everyone's thoughts here are very much with 9-year-old George and 11-year-old Rose Fry, who had to stand and watch their parents' bodies be brought back to shore. And of course with Roy Dinsmore and his 2 children, who lost their mother Jean. Dean Plum, one of the friends who was on holiday with them, is still in hospital tonight. He's physically okay, but deeply traumatised by what happened. Away from Toenail Beach, we found British holidaymakers keeping a close eye on their children and the sea.
An accident like this makes you think, what's being done about it and what should have been done about it, I would imagine, yeah.
Because they're young children, you've got to be very careful, keep an eye on them at all times. But before we even go onto the beach, just make sure that the sea's fairly calm. And if it's a rough beach with big waves, we don't go there, we'll go somewhere else.
It's been a terrible year for the tourist industry here. Earlier this summer, just 20 miles away, Madeleine McCann disappeared from Praia de Luz. Now this. As the sun sets on this year's holiday season, locals are praying next year brings a change in their fortunes. Rebecca Broxton in Sagres for the West Tonight.
It was a spectacular sight. 4 Hercules aircraft flying at low level in formation over Wiltshire in a final farewell to the county that has been their home for the past 44 years.
A hugely emotional day. It marks the end of an era for the Hercules Force, having spent 43 years here.
A bit of a lump in the throat today?
Oh, very much so.
It's a very poignant way to say farewell and to show the respect, our respect to the local community that have done so much to help us through our endeavours, both at home and overseas on operations.
It was with heavy hearts that standard bearers bore the Hercules Squadron's ceremonial flags onto the back of the aircraft. Within minutes, the Hercules were airborne, flying over Wiltshire's main towns. Malmesbury, Killearn, Warminster, Trowbridge, Devizes, Calne, Chippenham and Wootton Bassett.
Ho yay! Ho yay! Ho yay! The last Hercules fly past is about to commence.
Brought a lump to the throat.
When you see that the last Hercules leave, it's like a friend leaving, which you won't see again.
We'll miss them quite a bit because we live on the flight path actually, so we'll miss them coming over.
And so the workhorse of the RAF lands at its new home, command transferred to Bryce Norton's station commander. And so as one chapter in the history of the Hercules ends, another begins. The work of the aircraft, its crews and support staff will continue here in Oxfordshire. But tonight, many will mourn the loss of the sight of this great aircraft in the skies over Wiltshire. Rebecca Broxton on board the last flight of the Hercules from RAF Lynham for the West Country Tonight. Jane Hopes devoted most of her working life to the NHS. But the question her family are still asking tonight is, did the NHS fail her? Until her death 6 years ago, it was a life she lived to the full.
She took up skiing, I remember, in her mid-40s and became addicted to it. So she'd have 2 winter holidays a year and no summer holidays because she enjoyed it so much. And, and her life was just beginning to become enjoyable and pleasant.
Was she a lady that did live life to the full?
Oh yes, she did. She enjoyed parties and the odd glass of wine and tennis and skiing. Yes, she did.
But Jane's life changed in 2001 when the senior hospital manager from South Gloucestershire had a lump in her breast checked out. Pathologists at the BRI examined her biopsy. Jane was told it was benign. But 2 years later, she was given the devastating news she had breast cancer, and it had spread. Following this diagnosis, a pathologist at Frenchay checked her original biopsy. He concluded it did show pre-invasive cancer of the breast. Jane Hopes was never told, for which the Trust has apologised to her family. The cancer spread.
Even when she was very sick, and she said to me, well, I'd like to give myself every chance because, I've got a lot of cancer in my body, but it's not spread to my brain. And I thought that was quite sad.
But sadly...
Oh, she died a couple of weeks later.
So she was fighting it right until the end?
Oh, yeah, she was a fighter. She fought quite hard for a lot of her life. It was sad, really, that she was a big fan of the NHS, and it turns out the NHS may well have let her down. She could, if she'd been properly diagnosed before the cancer became invasive, she could have seen her daughter get married, she could have seen her grandkids.
And what Jane's family don't understand is why no one told them that Jane's case formed part of the major investigation into histopathology at the BRI.
I think it would have been honest and straightforward if somebody had said this is what's happening, and we could have gone in and given some evidence. You know, that if there are lots of cases being investigated, surely everybody involved as a member of the family or a friend of those people should be able to go in and speak and give evidence.
Another of the 26 cases was Iris Nix. The 72-year-old from Wootton-under-Edge was told in December 2006 that she had breast cancer. Within a fortnight, she underwent surgery and had a part of her breast removed. 12 days later, when she went for a checkup, she was told a mistake had been made and she'd never had cancer at all.
When they just came out and said you'd never had cancer, I think I was more emotional about that than being told that I did have it in the first place.
So you went through the whole operation for nothing?
For nothing. Mm.
Iris sought legal advice, and although University Hospitals Bristol did not formally accept there had been negligence on its part, it did settle her case out of court for £12,000. Again, it was only a few months ago that she realised her case was one of those being investigated by the inquiry.
Just knowing this now is horrific. It's awful. You know, I suppose now I just feel grateful that I'm through it and I'm okay, but some poor people aren't. You know, I mean, it's an awful thing.
While Iris's case has been settled out of court, tonight Jane hopes his family still have many unanswered questions. A beautiful winter's morning in the heart of Wiltshire. Deep in the forest, a craftsman uses the most basic of tools and ancient skills to create a rustic sheep hurdle.
Yes, we've coppiced this hazel, which is, the top here is about 8 to 12 years old, but the roots can go back to before the Norman Conquest.
So Carl, these are the sails, they're the frame to the sheep hurdle, and you've got the mould which they're put into on the bottom. What happens next?
Well, we weave these in. We mould on a curve so that when we put these in, it's fairly easy to follow them round, and you work them down, twisting the rod rather than bending the sail.
Now the hazel's quite solid, it's not very pliable, is it?
It's normally very pliable. But we have a little problem called frost last night.
Right.
And which means sometimes it won't do this. Turn it, twist it up again and round, and in it then drops.
So Carl, 24 layers later, and we've got the final finished article.
If I just move the bean rods to one side, and this is one I made earlier.
Well, these hurdles are still made in exactly the same way as they were when they were first constructed back in the Iron Age, when man began farming and domesticating animals.
Nowadays, it's gardeners rather than farmers who use these traditional hurdles.
They've got 10-15 year life. Plants will grow through them, so you can get honeysuckles, clematis, roses, things growing through them, and they'll stay there forever. So that's what their main use is. But of course, films is the other thing. An awful lot of film work.
In fact, Carl helped build the village used in the opening scenes of the film First Night, and he's also helped construct sets for Lorna Doone and Midsummer Murders. As well as sheep hurdles, he makes trugs, brooms, tent pegs and gate hurdles, and supplies Prince Charles with his creations, all crafted from the timber from Stanton Forest.
It must be quite a lonely existence.
It's a lovely life, really, because you're sat here now, where we're actually sat, over that side last year there was 4 young kestrels nesting. There's a buzzard over there, and at the back end I know where the woodpecker's nest is. So there's a bit of everything in here. And if you're here quietly like I am, and no vehicles or anything, nobody around with their dogs, the deer come through here, they follow through in the sunshine, so you see everything.
It's an idyllic way of life for one of the few truly rural craftsmen keeping these ancient traditions alive, far away from the stresses of 21st century life. Rebecca Broxton in Stanton Forest in Wiltshire for the West Country Tonight.
Vanessa!
Her crimes are so horrendous, little wonder she hides her head in shame. Nursery worker Vanessa George today admitted to sexually abusing children in her care. She chose her victims because they were too young to talk.
It makes me sick. Like I say, nobody has my children. I don't let anybody have my children. And like I say, the fact that I've actually gone down there and handed her over, it's just something that I'll never forgive myself for.
A group from Plymouth travelled to Bristol today to watch proceedings. They heard George, together with Angela Allen from Nottingham and Colin Blanchard from Greater Manchester, plead guilty to a string of offences of sexual assault and swapping indecent images. The trio met on the social networking site Facebook and began abusing their victims in September last year. They recorded their images on mobile phones and swapped the pictures via the internet. Today was the first time they'd met face to face.
They showed total disregard for the lives of their victims, their own families and those they worked with, all of whom have been left devastated by these crimes.
As a worker at Little Ted's nursery, George was trusted by parents to care for their precious offspring. Trust she abused time and time again. Today, police revealed the trio had even talked about abducting a child. Just how many and exactly which children in her care George abused may never be known, as the police have not been able to identify the victims. In adjourning sentencing until the 13th of November, the judge, Mr. Justice Royce, addressed George's barrister, saying, "Your client knows who she abused and who she hasn't. If I were a parent, I would want to know. Would it not at least be decent for her to indicate who she's abused and who she's not?"
I'd like to know why. I'd like to ask her why. I don't feel like I want to go in there and beat her up, for want of a better word. I don't know if you could say that, but to me it's why? Why did you do this? Kids of her own, for God's sake.
Such is the nature of the trio's crimes. They're being held in isolation in prison for their own protection. It's likely to remain that way for a very, very long time. Rebecca Broxton at Bristol Crown Court for the West Country Tonight.
It's been the biggest day of industrial action for more than 30 years. Teachers, street cleaners, council gardeners, radiographers. They may have very different jobs, but today thousands of public sector workers came together for a common cause, to protest at government plans to change their pensions, which will essentially mean they have to work longer for less.
To me, a deal's a deal. I signed on for a particular package and that package is being taken away from me.
I work for the NHS and I just cannot manage on my pension. I'm just going into debt more and more because I just cannot manage on it. And most NHS people have to work shifts, and for older women it just kills you. You're just dog-tired all the time, and we cannot manage on our pensions, really.
2,000 people marched through Gloucester in the biggest demonstration the city has seen for years.
Nobody wants to lose money, even a day's pay.
But what are they supposed to do?
Gloucester hasn't seen a march like this and a rally like this in years. So the turnout, you know, the Prime Minister may, in the hallowed halls of Parliament, may talk about a damp squid, but that's not what's happening on the ground.
There'll be over 2,000 people here. This is the biggest march ever, I think, in Dorchester.
No matter where you were in the southwest, it was almost impossible not to be affected by the strike.
It's our pay, it's our jobs, and now it's our pensions they're trying to, take money from.
But by far the biggest protest in the southwest was in Bristol, where thousands took to the streets to voice their frustrations.
Why are you here today?
Because I want to protect my pension. I've not been working for the council long. I finally got a good pension. I don't want to end up having to work longer to get less of my pension back, having paid more in over the period of time between now and my retirement.
Many of those on the march felt they were being forced to pay for the financial crisis the country is in.
How will it affect you personally?
I suppose quite simply, working longer. I'm not sure where any benefits from cutting pensions will go. I think that it may go to pay off deficits and stuff, and it won't benefit people in the long run.
Well, to give you an idea of just how many people are involved in this march, they left College Green about 20 minutes ago. They're still coming down Park Street, and they're already heading up Baldwin Street towards Castle Park.
An hour later, they were still on the march.
Do you think the government will listen to people's demands?
I hope so. That's all I can say. I hope so, yeah. Because I think people are committed and they're serious about this action. Yeah.
Do you think going on strike today will change the government's mind about your pension deal?
Probably not, because they're very deaf. They've got plenty of money. It doesn't really affect them. But my goodness, look at all the people that have actually come out today to demonstrate and to give a voice to what they really feel in their hearts.
Well, this is the biggest mass walkout that the South West has seen in the past 30 years. The TUC estimates that 20,000 people took to the streets of Bristol today, ranging from teachers to physiotherapists, from council painter and decorators to midwives. The message they have for the government is that unless a deal is reached on their pensions, industrial action will continue, and we could face further disruption to our public services over the coming months. Rebecca Broxton in Bristol for the West Country Tonight.